Well, hi everybody, and welcome to BPD Update. I'm Chief Steve Strachan, and if you watch this show or if you've seen it before, you know that this show is about one thing, and that is about letting you know what's going on at the Bremerton Police Department and what your police department is doing around our community and some of the things that are going on in the city of Bremerton. Again, welcome to the show, and first of all, I want to introduce our guest who's going to talk a little bit about fraud and how to prevent and to avoid becoming a victim of fraud, our Community Relations Officer, Joe Sexton. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Chief.
And before we have Joe go a little bit into about this topic of fraud and how to make sure that you're not a victim, let me share a couple facts with you. And one of them is a case that we had in the month of January. In fact, we're taping this show in January, and yes, that is the sun. You can tell that I'm squinting a little bit, and it's a little unusual. I'm not used to this, but we had an officer who took a call involving fraud where a business in the city of Bremerton received a phone call from someone who said that they were from the utility company, Puget Sound Power, and they said that your power to your business is going to be shut off today unless you immediately make payment on back payments that were owed. And they made reference and asked questions and sort of somehow convinced these individuals, and they're intelligent business owners. I mean, again, I think people sometimes think that victims of fraud have to be, they're not paying attention. It's a very sophisticated business. And these people convinced this business owner that they had to make payment immediately using a particular kind of payment. We'll talk to Joe a little bit about that in a second. And they had already made $500 in payments when another person who was involved in the business came and said, I don't think this is legitimate. And they stopped, but they had already lost $500 that had actually gone through a particular method of payment that they had to make over the phone. And it was all fraudulent. So the officer had a phone number, because they actually had a phone number on their caller ID, and they called this number back, and the officer said, I'm a Bremerton police officer. We've received this complaint of fraud, and I don't want you to hang up. And they didn't hang up. And he asked them, where are you located? Jamaica. How does this work? And they said, we just pick a particular area code, happened to be 360 that day, and we work it for a couple of days or maybe a week, and then we move on to the next. And we have a sophisticated way of asking certain questions to convince these people that we know who they are, we know about their business. And he said, some number out of 10, maybe 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 20 will basically fall for it. And he said that we try to clear several $1,000s a day for each person on these phone banks in Jamaica. And he knew full well that in Jamaica, it's outside the country, that we really don't have any jurisdiction. It's very, very difficult, almost impossible to prosecute that. And they were just brazen about it. He answered the questions because, frankly, he didn't care. And I guess the best way to describe it is absolutely shameless. And there's too many folks out there, and many of them are outside our country, who are victimizing people through these kinds of frauds. So it's a great reminder to talk about this. And remember that it's not the other guy, it's all of us, whether you be a private person in your residence or a business owner, and we need to be very, very aware of this, these folks that are out there committing fraud. So, Joe, this is something that you give a lot of presentations about, you're very aware of these issues, so can you talk a little bit about the types of fraud that occur and some of the things that we've seen, and then, I'm obviously what I'm going to ask you is, how do you prevent it?
Sure. Well, right now, the big one that's running around is the IRS scam. Mm-hmm. And the potential victim will get a phone call from agent so-and-so from the Department of the Treasury stating that they owe back taxes, and if these back taxes aren't paid by their approved payment method, which is a prepaid Visa card, that local law enforcement will come out and arrest them. Well, we know that not to be true. And they are very well rehearsed, like all of these scam artists are. And they will actually give a callback number, and you call that callback number and ask to speak to the supervisor, and the supervisor's voice sounds quite a bit like the original caller, but they too will present a badge number or credential numbers and say, you've got to pay your back taxes or else you're going to be arrested. But we can make it in 2 or 3 easy installments if you use these prepaid debit cards, which are the scammer's preferred method of payment because they're as good as cash. And once you deposit it into their account or give them the PIN number, it's gone.
And it can't be tracked and it can't be taken back.
Correct.
Right, right. So in other words, they really focus on some method of payment that has to be immediate,
Right.
some method of payment that is not trackable. So you can't send a check.
Right.
They're not really that interested in your credit card number. They'll take that though in some
sure
cases.
they will.
And it's always right now. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, you've got to do it now. Or some of the other scams that we're seeing are, you've won a lottery, you've won a contest. Well, the catch is, in order to claim your prize, you have to send the people a amount of money for a processing fee or taxes or import duties. And again, it's with a Western Union or a quick pay, a prepaid debit card. But as I tell people, it's really hard to win a lottery that you didn't enter.
So they're taking advantage, and again, I think, and I can't stress this enough, I think people sometimes hear about this or they hear us talking about it and they say, well, I'd never be that dumb. I'd never be that, they can only victimize people that are not very smart or they're not paying attention. These scammers are really sophisticated, and
yes,
they're taking advantage sometimes of people's greed, sometimes of people not paying attention. Sometimes I think they're taking advantage of people being very nice. They're just too, they're too nice, frankly, and sometimes trusting. And they're very sophisticated about sort of acting like they know something about the people they're calling.
Yes.
One of the scams that you were talking about with me earlier is the grandparent scam. Can you talk a little bit about that one?
Yes, this one is another one that the scammers like to do. They like to have you act now. So they will hit you with something that strikes an emotional chord, and your other better judgment kind of goes by the wayside. Oh, I've won a big prize, or I've done this, I've done that, I have to act. And of course the scammers say, you must act now. It's a limited time offer.
Right.
But the grandparent scam usually calls about 2 in the morning, and an unsuspecting victim will say, hi grandma, this is your grandson. I'm in Mexico in jail and you need to send me $5,000 to get me out. Well, again, playing on that initial emotion, the unsuspecting grandma or grandpa are going to follow the instructions of this scammer without taking the time to say, okay, well, wait a minute. What is your name, grandson?
Right.
What is your mom's name?
Right.
What is your dog's name?
Right.
Where do you live? Well, in all cases, the grandchild will fail the test.
Right. And and people may again say, well, how could someone fall for that? But if you think about it, there's so many grandparents who often have a lot of grandkids. Frequently, 1 or 2 or more of them have, different kinds of issues. I mean, again, it happens in every family. And a grandparent who wants to help out and who wants to be a good person, when they get that call, particularly, like you say, 2 in the morning, I mean, none of us think very clearly at 2 in the morning in the first place. And then you get that call, and your first initial, emotion is, I want to help my family member. And so it leads into, well, you must be talking about my grandson Nick, and they'll say, yeah, it's Nick that you're talking about.
Exactly.
And again, these are smart people, good people, but and you hit on it perfectly, Joe. It keys on emotion instead of rationality.
Yes.
And they're taking advantage of that.
And that's what I tell the many groups I talk to. If you get an offer in the mail that you've won a prize, take the time to research it. You get the grandparent, okay? Take a return number from the scammer and call the grandchild. Call the mom and dad.
Right.
I actually had a call from a woman that got the grandparent scam call, and her grandson was sitting in the recliner next to her.
Right.
So the scammer didn't do quite so well that time.
Well, and remember too that this is all based on volume. I mean, these scammers are going to call, they may have to call 100 people before they get that one that they hook, but with that one hook, they may get $500 or $1,000 or $10,000.
Right.
They will get as much as they possibly can. And I keep going back to this word, they are shameless. And they're going to take advantage of people who often are the last people that should be victimized, that don't have a lot of money to begin with sometimes, and again, who are, it's a sad thing to say, but it's nice people. It's people who are doing this because they're so nice. They don't want to be rude, they don't want to hang up. So that brings us to, how do you avoid these things? I mean, what's the best way, what's the best advice you can give somebody? If I'm talking to my grandparent, or I'm talking to a parent, or I'm talking to a neighbor, what's the best way to not be victimized?
I just go back to the old saying, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Take the time to research. A lot of times you'll get these calls from bogus charities. They'll take a national event or a national disaster, and again, play on people's emotions to get them to donate to that. So I tell people, take the time. But I guess it comes down to 3 easy ways. If it comes by the phone and it's a scam, it's okay to hang up.
Right.
It's not rude. If it comes by email, that delete key is a marvelous tool. And if it comes by mail, say hello to the recycle bin.
Right, right. In other words, and I guess it's another way to say this is, don't be afraid to be rude to people who are doing this. And what I like to say is, no is a complete sentence.
Correct.
And again, I'm surprised by how many people I'll talk to that'll say, well, they kept talking to me and I didn't want to hang up. Hang up.
Right.
It's that easy. And the other thing that I would just remind our viewers is, the IRS doesn't demand payment today. It's going to be via mail, and you can always call the local IRS office. The utility, call that number and look up the number yourself. The police department, unfortunately, people will use the local police department as another way to scam people, and they'll say, this is Bremerton PD, and you're backed up on your traffic tickets or something like that. We don't collect for traffic tickets. We are not in that business. We don't collect money from anyone. That is all, it's either going to go through the court, and it's all done via mail. We don't arrest people for not paying there's no criminal charge for not paying taxes. That's a civil matter. So that's what we're here for. And if you have a question and you say, I'm not sure about this, we're your local police department. Our purpose is to serve you, and you can always call us. Talk to Joe, talk to me, talk to one of our officers. You never have to feel like you can't get the information. You never have to feel rushed. You never have to feel like this needs to be done today. And the business owner I was talking about at the beginning of this segment, if they would have just said, you know what, I'm going to take your number, I'm going to call my local police department, ask them, is this something that I should be following up on? If it was really Puget Sound Energy, they would say, of course, this is a legitimate call, and go through your local police department. We're happy to do that. But the scammers will never want to hear that, and they're probably going to hang up on you before you're going to allow them to hang up on them. So don't be rushed. Don't be afraid to be rude. Always feel free to contact us. So there's a lot of different types of scams. Good information we've presented here. If people want more information, if they want something written down, maybe to give to a relative to look over, where can they go for more information? Well,
we put together a piece about scams and some of the more common ones that are running around there, because they go in cycles. For a while, the IRS scam will run, and then it'll be the scam where you have a long lost relative in another country that has millions of dollars just with your name on it, as long as you send in the taxes. And on the City of Bremerton website, under the Bremerton Police section, we do have a listing of the scams and how to avoid becoming a victim, because we said they're very well rehearsed, they're very good at what they do, and they don't give up. So hanging up is okay, deleting is okay, and recycling is okay. And the best way to fight this is to know what to do about it. And particularly if you have a relative, a friend, somebody you know that you think needs this information, I really encourage you to share that information with them, because knowledge is power in this case. Last thing I would mention, Joe, is I remember when the Lakewood officers were killed in the coffee shop several years ago now, a huge tragedy, and all the emotion that people felt about it, including police officers. And I remember getting a phone call, and again, as a police officer and as a police chief, from someone who said, I'm representing the Lakewood Officers Memorial Fund, and we're raising money, and we know you feel strongly about law enforcement. They didn't know who I was. It was just a cold call. And they said, we want you to send money, and it was a scam. It was just people trying to get money, utilizing that emotional incident. That, again, is how shameless some of these individuals are. You can't make this stuff up. That's how bad it is. So again, always confirm the legitimacy of these things, and again, that's what we're here for. Give us a call, shoot us an email, go to our website. That's what Joe's here for, that's what we're here for. Thank you for being with us, Joe. You bet. And again, important stuff, and you can always go to our website for any information on scams and lots of other things as well. We'll be right back after this with our statistics and a few specific cases when we come back on BPD Update. Well, welcome back to BPD Update. I'm Chief Steve Strachan, and the second half of the show, we usually talk a little bit about some statistics, about some trends going on around the City of Bremerton and the police department, and then a couple of specific cases. So let's start, as we usually do, with the most recent statistics we have, which are for December of 2014, and we're comparing the December 14 stats
to the same month in 2013. And you can see that, again, some pretty significant reductions in some of these areas. But in just a second, we're going to talk about our frequent flyer focus areas, and unfortunately, some of those ticked up a little bit in December. But let's take a look at these. For reports, our number was down to 806, which is a 7% reduction from the same month in December of 2013. Wasn't that long ago, maybe 2 years ago, we were well over 1,000 reports every month consistently, always 1,000 to 1,100 reports. And reports are not the same as crimes, but it's basically incidents that require a police officer to do a report, obviously. So it is sort of analogous to crimes, and generally speaking, reports going down is a good thing. So we've been seeing those go down. They went into the 900s for a while, and now they're into the 800s pretty consistently. Our arrests were also down 39% to 147 for the month of December in 2014. Again, a pretty good sign because again, arrests are not the same as crime, but to have arrests beginning to go down over time is generally a good thing. Domestic violence was down 51%, again, a good sign. DUI is down 56%. This is an interesting one. A lot of times, the last couple months, we've shown DUIs going down from the month previous, and I've explained that DUIs are sort of a factor of how many emphasis patrols we do. When officers are out on patrol, they're obviously looking for drunk drivers, but we also do emphasis patrols where we sort of flood the city or flood the area with officers specifically looking for drunk drivers. And when we don't have an emphasis, you'll see those numbers go down. In December 2014, it went down to just 10 DUIs for the month. And we did do emphasis patrols in December, especially, by the way, on New Year's Eve. I worked New Year's Eve. Was out in a patrol car, and I mean, you could not turn around without seeing a squad car. I mean, everybody that was weaving in any way got pulled over that night, and I think there was one DUI arrest the entire evening. I'm taking this to mean that I think that we're starting to see people are getting it, and they're not going out drinking and driving. They're getting a designated driver, especially on nights like New Year's Eve, but even night to night. So hopefully we'll continue to see those numbers trending downward. And our mental health calls were no change, 23 for both months between 2013 and 14. So we go to the next slide here. This one, unfortunately, not so good. We have been seeing our frequent flyer focus areas. These are crimes that are most directly related to what we call frequent flyers. The people that are sort of the chronic offenders, and that really the area that we've been focusing on at the Bremerton Police Department, trying to take them out, trying to send a strong message that that's not okay to do in our city. In terms of increased jail time, in terms of increased prosecution, and really focusing on those frequent flyers that have sometimes hundreds of contacts with police officers. And that's one of the reasons we have our high five list that we send out in our newsletter and on our Twitter feed. Those have been going down. The trend line has been going down now for several months, but in December of 2014, they went up. The other thing I tell you is that I don't know what it is. It's the full moon. If it's something in the water, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it, but everywhere, not just city of Bremerton, but everywhere, certainly in Kitsap County, Pierce County, King County, December was just a tough month for some reason, and a lot of increased activity, unfortunately, and we're going to obviously can just keep an eye on that, but you can see the trespass was up just a little bit. Theft cases, unfortunately, up 29%. We saw vehicle theft going from a very low number of 12 for the month. That's a very low number for a city of our size, and unfortunately went up to 22. Residential burglary, fortunately, no change, but still 13, and 13 is not a number that we're happy with at all. Vehicle prowling really up pretty substantially to 23. And then shoplifting, and I'll talk a little bit about shoplifting in a second. As we go to our next slide here, I just want to point out again, the trend lines month to month are down overall. In December, because we had a relatively low sample size for some of these crimes, it started to tick up a little bit, but it's just something that we always talk about because we want to have those metrics and not just ignore this, but stay on top of it. And then the fact is, a few actors drive a lot of crime. If you get one or two people that are out there doing a lot of vehicle prowling, a lot of motor vehicle theft, they can drive those numbers up very, very quickly because it's a crime where a few people that do it prolifically, that are hitting a lot of cars, can drive those numbers up very quickly. So in other words, when we take them out, it also makes a substantial difference. We are actively working on campers, the people that are floating around, sometimes camping and committing crimes to support their lifestyle and sometimes their habit, their drug or alcohol habit. These are different from homeless people. Homeless people who need need their help or need some help are very different from what I would call campers or frequent flyers. These are two very, very different groups. And we're focusing on those frequent flyers. We're supporting their lifestyle by committing crimes, and we are really focusing on that, making sure they're not squatting in vacant houses, and that this is really a long-term project for us. In terms of vehicle thefts, again, you get a few people driving those numbers up if they're stealing a lot of cars. And I'll again remind you, and you've heard this before if you've seen this show before, a lot of our stolen cars are older Japanese cars. And when I say older, I mean mid-90s and earlier. And the offenders are using shaved keys, which is a particular kind of key that doesn't have a lot of notches on it, frankly, and it'll work on a lot of those cars. Cars newer than mid to late 90s are very, very difficult to steal, bottom line. But an older, let's say a 15, 20-year-old Honda, Toyota, Nissan, much, much easier to take, and that's the majority of the cars that we're seeing stolen. It's also a very common car. They're ubiquitous because lots of folks have those cars. If you have one of those cars, I really encourage you to get a club or to otherwise harden that car a little bit, because unfortunately it is a target for vehicle thefts. And then in terms of shoplifting, I want to talk about this for a second. Our shoplifting numbers have gone up. They've gone up for a lot of departments across the state, specifically because of privatization of alcohol. When that initiative passed a couple of years ago, a number of reasons for it, people made their decision, which is fine. But an unintended consequence was that because there are so many more stores that have alcohol, and when I say alcohol, I mean liquor, not beer or wine, but liquor, scotch, whiskey, things like that. Particularly if they don't do a very good job of securing it, putting it behind glass, keeping it in the back of the store, the shoplifting has just gone way up, and it often does involve juveniles, unfortunately. So it has increased access to juveniles, and it has increased shoplifting, and it's not a good thing. Many of our retailers across the state and in Bremerton have really made it much more difficult to do. Again, locking it up, putting it behind glass, making it difficult to shoplift. Some have not, and we are working with our retailers to make sure that they're all doing that, making it difficult to shoplift, and that'll bring those numbers down. We're not there yet, but the majority of the shoplifting incidents that we're getting are liquor from the retailers that didn't used to carry it, and now they do. And then again, vehicle prowling. I'm still surprised by how many people don't lock their cars up. Please lock your car up. That's a simple one. Let's talk a little bit about overall activity for the entire year for 2014. Not a lot to explain here, but just a good FYI for you, and this is for all the departments in Kitsap County. You can see Bainbridge Island was up a little bit in terms of activity. This is not crime, this is activity. Anything that a police officer did. You can see Bremerton was actually down a little bit, as was the Kitsap County Sheriff. That's generally a good thing. You can see that Port Orchard was up over 10% and Poulsbo up almost 7%. As we finish up, two quick things I want to mention, and one is a topic that we have been talking about now for the past several months, after Ferguson, after Garner, the Garner case in New York, and all the controversy about police-community relations. Something I've been talking a lot about is the media is going to move on to something else, because they always do, the national media. But we still need to work on this in a thoughtful way within our community. That's really what's going to make the change over time. And we have been doing a very good job in the city of Bremerton and with our community groups, who are great and constructive and really have a good dialogue with the city and with the police department. And part of what we're going to, sort of the next step that we're going to take with Bremerton is some additional cultural communications training with a gentleman by the name of Elmer Dixon that I've worked with before. Does a lot of executive training internationally, very respected, very cutting edge, to talk not just about diversity, but how do we as police officers understand the perspective, maybe the baggage that people bring and that we bring to every interaction. That's training that we're going to be doing coming up in April. It's leading edge training that I think that we're really going to find valuable in the city of Bremerton. The last thing I want to share with you is this. Brandon Greenhill, one of our officers, took a call. I've got a photo for you here in a second, during the holiday season, of somebody stealing the Christmas lights off of the trees in downtown Bremerton. He located that person, he recovered the lights, and a lot of police departments and a lot of police officers would just put it into evidence or otherwise wrap up the case and be done with it. And Brandon took the time to go back out, string those Christmas lights back up. I've got this photo of Brandon putting those back up, doing his very best impersonation of Clark Griswold. And he got those back up, got them lit up so that people could enjoy them for the holidays. And it's that kind of extra effort. Is it a huge deal? No, but it's the kind of thing that people care about, and I certainly care about as the chief. And I credit Officer Greenhill, as well as really all of our folks for always go the extra mile, and we need to really recognize that. It also shows the pride that we take in serving you in the city of Bremerton, and Officer Greenhill is just one of many who has that same attitude. BPD Update, as I mentioned, is all about showing you what we do, telling you what we do, and inviting your scrutiny and your questions. We have a great website, we have a Twitter feed. I invite you to sign up. We really are honored to serve this community, and we'll see you next month on BPD Update. Thanks for joining us.